Hello and welcome to The Picture on the Page, appreciating art in picture books. I was just reading a little bit about the history of illustration styles in picture books. But because we're often reading picture books to someone, perhaps a very small someone, we can lose sight of the fact that the art in the book is art. For example, this is Where the Wild Things Are, Story and Pictures by Maurice Sendak, and it won the Caldecott Medal. And that's an award given each year to the picture book that is considered to have the finest art in it. And it would be very easy to just read a page like this where there's only 2 words on the page, just and grew, and not actually take a moment to look at what's really in the picture and appreciate what's in there. So I hope that the following program will give you just a sense of the scope of pictures and art that you can find in books, and that's why you're never too old for a good picture book. So now, without further ado,
The Picture on the Page, Appreciating Art in Picture Books by Sarah Scoggin, March 2021. The first picture book I would like to talk about is The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. May be familiar to many of you. It won the Caldecott Medal in 1963, and it's something of a milestone in children's literature. The tale is told with simple collage shapes, and then the art sort of drawn on or around those shapes. Down fell the snow, plop, on Peter's head. And on the right there you can see that just the simple shape of the boy in his snowsuit and the footprints give you a sense of his experience in the blank white snow where he's the first one to walk. In fact, Peter and his snowsuit became so iconic that in October of 2017 there were Snowy Day stamps. But next I want to talk to you about a book that is not as famous, Colors versus Shapes by Mike Bolt. And I want to share this one because it's the first book that ever got me really thinking like an illustrator. I read this book many times to my young daughter, and it's about colors and shapes who are going to be in a talent contest, and whoever wins will be declared the stars of the book. So they're ready to go out onto stage. Way up in the right hand corner it says Team 1, please take the stage. Colors are going to go first. And it wasn't until the umpteenth time through these 2 red characters, one putting his hands together like he's about to dive off a diving board, and the other one holding his hand up like something is high up. And I realized they were both referring to when they dive off of a high dive into a yellow and blue paint and become orange and purple respectively. And the Team 2, the shapes over there on the left, we have a pentagon and a hexagon pointing to and polishing a cannon, and later in the story they get shot out of a cannon. So there's a little sort of hidden story that's going on in the details of the book that you might just gloss over if you aren't really thinking about what the pictures are saying. And speaking of foreshadowing in picture books, we have Cozy by Jan Brett. So Cozy, the musk ox, is there in the middle, talking to a mother lemming. Over there on the left in that sort of medallion, that oval there, you can see Cozy's family so far away in the distance. But in the right hand medallion you see a snowshoe hare. In fact, the next animal we are going to meet. And so while the snowshoe hare is talking to Cozy, you can see on both medallions it's elsewhere. Meanwhile, the owl is getting blown around by the storm, and the owl is in fact the next creature that we're going to meet. So it's sort of always a little preview of what's coming up or happening elsewhere. Some books tell their stories completely by pictures, without any words at all. For example, A Stone for Sasha by Aaron Becker. And this tells the story of a golden meteorite that crashes to Earth, and you can see it burying itself deep in the layers of the Earth, We've got ancient sea creatures and dinosaurs, and slowly the geological forces bring this gold up to the surface during the Ice Age, and we're following this gold throughout the age. All the time we're following that gold through the ages. You can see there it's part of a giant statue, and what will become of the gold, and eventually it will get back to the girl that we saw standing on the cover, and a golden stone for Sasha. There are certainly stories where paying attention to details is more than just a nice bonus. It's actually a real deep part of the story, as in The 11th Hour, A Curious Mystery by Graham Bass. And in this story, a lot of animals are invited over to the elephant's birthday party, and there turns out to be a big mystery to solve. Maybe we can find some clues by looking at details. Is that Morse code around the border? Are those numbers that we see in the balls in the border there? I wonder if they're telling us something about the mystery. Here's another book. This Is My Home, This Is My School by Jonathan Bean. And I chose to talk about this one because of the style. And you see the main character there pointing to his house and school because he's homeschooled there with his siblings. Here's one of the early pages. This is our classroom. You would just only take about 2 seconds to read those words. If you had turned the page, you wouldn't really appreciate necessarily all that's going on in this picture. It's sort of sketchy, cartoony, giving a sense of both richness and chaos. Or that's how I feel about this image. Closely you can see on what looks like a disused stove, a terrarium and a butterfly in a jar, a meteorite up on a shelf, a map of the United States behind them, hand-drawn bird painting, everything from a pretty modern-looking computer to an actual pear tree that apparently is growing in a pot there. So there's a lot to see in the story and in the image. And in a very different illustrated style, we have The Rainbow Bridge by Audrey Wood. Paintings by Robert Florczak. Not illustrations by or pictures by, but paintings by Robert Florczak. And they're just completely page spread feeling paintings, and the light and the details, that photorealism to give a real depth to this story of Limuwu, the earth goddess. Sometimes picture books give us a glimpse into historical art, as in Brother Hugo and the Bear by Kathy Beebe and illustrated by S.D. Schindler. So we have Brother Hugo and the abbot, and you can see a sort of medieval countryside over on the right there. Big illuminated letters, the growing vines out of the letters, just the whole feeling of medieval style. Or Renaissance style. This is Paul O. Zielinski's Rapunzel, and I've read this book a number of times, and I never noticed before that there's a little cat with her there in the windowsill. There it is. Inside again, full big pages of paintings with the perspective of the tiles on the floor and the details of the clothing. But again, until I was looking at the books for this program, I never noticed there's a big sort of hemispherical mirror. Here you can see the mirror on the table, and it's reflecting them in the scene, and also it's reflecting what's behind them, which you can't see in the picture. And it reminded me a lot of another image. This is the Arnolfini Wedding, a 1434 painting by Jan van Eyck. And you can see behind the two people in the painting on the far wall there's a mirror, and if you look close up in the mirror you can see the people coming into the door, sort of what's behind you, the viewer in the painting. Very different again is the story Duiztak by Carson Ellis, and it's a Caldecott honor book about some various insects and other creatures that see a sprout coming out of the ground, and they talk in bug language. but you can get context clues from what they're seeing in front of them as to what they're saying in their bug language. So, do is talk, people come and keep asking, and it seems to me that they're definitely asking, what is this? What is that? Here we have some of the creatures trying to reach up to the top, and they're stretching and they can't reach, and they say, Rubada unk ribble, su, bore inkin icky. They open the door and they say, Icky, rubada und ribble. So that must be Icky, and they're asking him for a ribble. And you could even say to a child you're reading it to, okay, they need something because they can't reach, so what could a ribble be? Unk ribble, they say, as Icky comes out with his ladder. So you can kind of learn language, bug language, the same way that we tend to learn real languages when we're toddlers and absorbing the language by the exposure to what we see and what we hear together. Another Caldecott Honor book is Knuffle Bunny, A Cautionary Tale by Mo Willems. And I want to mention this book because of its art style. The style of taking actual photographs and then overlaying the characters. So you see Trixie and her dad in the middle there, overlaid over the photograph. This man there reading up on his stoop up there towards the corner. And just that blending of the background and the foreground, even though they look completely different. And the flip side of that is a book called I Grew Up on a Farm by Alan K. Lewis and illustrated by Bob Fletcher. And this book was created by taking actual photographs of the main characters. For example, the two boys there in the middle and their dog is an actual photograph, and then the illustrator has used looks like oil pastel to draw the rest of the scene, recreate the background behind them, so it's sort of a seamless image of sort of the color, the present time, and looking back into the past with the black and white photo incorporated. Next I want to mention a book simply called A Book by Mordecai Gernstein. And this is a book that I would call a meta book. In this meta story, the main character is a girl who's aware she's in a story. She's trying to find what genre her story should be or what the plot for her story should be. Her brother has gone off to a space story, her father has gone off into a clown story, and this goose is offering to help her find her way. And there she is looking right up at the reader. Eek! What's that huge blobby thing that looks something like a face? That's a reader, and you might want to be careful. It can read everything you say. So I love the perspective that we really look like we're interacting with the characters in the book and they're looking out of the pages to us. Another book that is sort of meta in a way is Battle Bunny by John Cheska and Mark Barnett, pictures by Matthew Myers. And you can see there's what looks like handwriting that says "and Alex" in the corner. And it's the sort of two-layered story of a boy named Alex who gets a book called Birthday Bunny, but he thinks it's too sweet and boring for him, and he wants to make it more action-packed. So he first starts by just crossing out a few letters or words and adding a few things like a belt and a walkie-talkie on the bunny. And he keeps crossing out more and more words, and the story gets more and more intense and action-packed, until finally he's basically just crossing out all of the words and creating his own words and pictures. That is the character Alex, who now has to save the world and stop a battle bunny from taking over it. So it's kind of how he's interacting with the pictures and the words that are on the page as a character himself. So we see how he wants the story to end. Next, I'd like to mention the book Pennies in a Jar by Dory Chaconis and illustrated by Ted Lewin. This is another story that uses full-page or even two-page illustrations to tell the story. And this is watercolor. And it's a story of a boy whose father is away at war, and he's kind of scared of horses. So this picture struck me because we're getting the boy's perspective sort of under the horse's belly, and the horse is huge and intimidating to him. But it also struck me the skill of using all these different colors to give us a sense of realism, that light on a black horse. The horse isn't really just done all in black paint, it's all done with whites and blues and purples that give us a sense of light shining on a black horse. And then a childhood favorite of mine, Where's Waldo? This is Where's Waldo Now, the deluxe edition by Martin Hanford. I read this book many times growing up, and of course you're looking for Waldo, or his Waldo Watcher friends, or many other things you could look for. But because I was so busy focusing on that, I never really realized the chaos going on in the orchestra. So here we have the orchestra playing, but because I don't see anything that looks like Waldo, I kind of ignored everything that was going on. But there's actually a man with an arrow using his harp like a bow to stick up with an arrow of the man next to him. There are two men who are sword fighting with their bass fiddle bows, it looks like. There's a man who's getting his head crashed by a pair of cymbals. And three people who are elbowing, poking, or otherwise bumping into their neighbors as they're trying to play the music. And just these sort of visual jokes that I never paid attention to. Sometimes the style or the medium of the illustrations is very fitting to the subject matter, and I don't think there's a better example of this than Mr. Buttonman and the Great Escape by Jolie Gebhardt. And it's a story of Mr. Buttonman, who is clearly a button with a sewn body sitting there on that spool thread. And he gets accidentally picked up by a woman who likes to sew and put into her button jar, and how he will make a great escape to get back to his home outside. You could see it's actually made by doing applique and embroidery, sort of this 3D textile creation with the buttons actually sewn on it, and then pictures taken of those. So I could just imagine the painstaking care of stitching this entire story that's fitting for a man made out of a button. And this is a wordless story, so it's told completely with those images. Another interesting take on creating an image to tell a story is A Million Dots by Sven Volker. And this is sort of a story that builds up using more and more dots. So on this page we have 2,048 dots that you can see are forming what looks like cargo to go on a cargo ship. You can see all the way over there on the right the edge of the ship that's being loaded up. At every step we get twice as big, so 2,048 plus 2,048 is 4,096, and now the ship is sailing, and we have 4,096 dots in the sky, reflecting in the water, and also the windows in the boat. So each step of the way we're building up the image with twice as many tiny dots. Also, sometimes the style of a book can be a joke in its own right, and there are many things in a story that might go over a child's head, but an adult could also appreciate. This is Boy Saves Earth from Giant Octopus by Frank Ash and Devin Ash, and it's about a boy whose father works at the Daily Comet. So the story is told very much in a tabloid newspaper type style, and we have suspiciously familiar looking face over there on the right. That's the reporter Roger, who's being pulled off the story of the flying spaghetti monster in order to go investigate a dinosaur egg that is hatching at a local museum. And there's lots of little jokes for those adults who understand what tabloid newspapers are like and have experience of having cheesy science fiction from past decades. Next up, I want to mention the Celestine and the Hare series. This is Catching Dreams by Karen Celestine. And the stories are told by creating a scene with felted wool characters. So here's another title in that series, Finding Your Place. Here's the character of Emily in the middle. And in these stories, the characters either invent something or craft something that's part of the storyline, and then at the end, there are instructions of how you can make your own, often the identical thing that the characters have created. So it's almost like you could reach in and pull out that actual craft into the real world by making your own. Another book that uses photography to create its story is The Secret Life of Squirrels, written and photographed by Nancy Rose. And here we have Mr. Peanut the squirrel, who has various adventures of his own. There's a series of different books, and these were created without manipulating the images. They actually created little scenes and then put things like peanuts and things like that in the scene, and letting the squirrels explore it and just taking pictures of them as they naturally interacted with this tiny environment. So it's kind of fun to see how the squirrels can look natural in these funny little scenes. If Rocks Could Sing is a discovered alphabet book by Leslie McGurk. And as she said, a discovered alphabet. These are pictures of rocks that she found on the seashore. You can see the seaweed there at the bottom. So she did not carve these rocks, she just discovered them. And it took her a long time to discover all the letters of the alphabet, but she also was thinking about the shapes of rock. What could she see in the shapes of the rocks that she found on the seashore? So for instance, she found this rock and she said, to me that looks like a rabbit. R is for rabbit. So that got me thinking of how I could look at something like a smooth stone or something else that I found in my environment and say to myself, what does that look like? What does that remind me of? To get me thinking of shapes, maybe in a different way. Instead of just thinking of something as a rock, what does that connect with in my mind? I also want to mention Over in the Jungle, a rainforest rhyme, which won the iParenting Media Award. And this is by Marianne Burks and illustrated by Jeanette Canyon. And it was illustrated by creating these 3D models out of clay. So everything there is created out of clay. It's incredibly detailed, and it has a rhyme that was similar to the form of Over in the Meadow, but now it's Over in the Jungle. So we're counting up with different animals. This is the page with 9 slots. And though I read this story a number of times, I never noticed until I was looking at this book more closely for this program, there are 9 bananas in the scene. And there are also 9 drops of water. So every time we turn the page, we're going to see there are the same number of drops of water as animals and other instances of that number hidden in the scene. Speaking of hidden in the scene, similar to Where's Waldo, we have the book Migloo's Weekend by William B. And Migloo the dog hides in these incredibly crowded scenes. Even though it's a different style than Where's Waldo, there's also a storyline about someone who doesn't like the entertainer Flashy Gordon. But in this story, besides finding Migloo the dog, we can also see a happy traffic cone, or a gnome carrying manure bags into the gardening center, or a golden Viking, or, most unusual of all, a scarecrow dressed like Napoleon and drinking an orange soda. So you can kind of make up your own stories and see stories going on in the background, even though they're not the main story following Migloo the dog. In a similar vein to finding stories within pictures is the Wimmel book series. So this is My Big Wimmel Book on the Farm. And Wimmel books are wordless stories, and in the front cover they will have perhaps a dozen or so family groups or individual characters, and you can follow them throughout the entire book. So you could pick one to follow. Perhaps this fellow who's taking a nap on the roof, his name is Brady, and you could follow his adventures, or you could find all the characters on each page, but collectively it's telling one story of a day on a farm. And it's a great way to practice seeing what the stories are saying, how you're drawing out what story is happening just based on what you see without any text to help you. You could also make up stories with other characters that appear in different scenes but that aren't on every page. And finally, I just want to mention Four Beloved Tales is a series of books, and this is Four Beloved Tales, Hansel and Gretel Stories Around the World by Carrie Meister. So it's telling the story of Hansel and Gretel, but it's 4 different versions of the same basic idea of the children going out into the forest and there being a witch there, different cultures. So the original story, Hansel and Gretel with the gingerbread house, is based on the original German one. But there's also another version called just The Witch, and that's from Russia. You see, it's a completely different style of illustration, sort of soft shapes without any really hard lines, one of sort of color that's bleeding together. There's a version that's from Italy, so have sort of the Italian Renaissance feel of the clothing that they're wearing, the color scheme, the shape of the ship. It's just different from the previous 2. And finally, we have Juan and Maria, a fairy tale from the Philippines. And again, a style different than the previous 3, trying to fit the style, the illustrations, to the culture that's telling the tale. So maybe next time you're looking at a picture book, linger just a little bit longer over those pictures and see what roads those images, those pictures, that art can lead you down.
So that's all the art I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the selection. If you want to order any of those books or any of the books in our library system, you can still do so through curbside pickup. And if you're not quite sure what books you want, but you know what sort of books you want, you can use the Pick Books for Me service. I'll put a link down in the description. You just fill out a form with types of books you're looking for, whether for youth 0 to 17 or for adults. Give us a few days and we'll put together a custom list of books for you to pick up. Thanks so much for watching.